It's time for another episode of Gospel Preaching Live, brought to you by the Kearney Church of Christ, which meets at 406 North Clark in Kearney, Missouri. Make plans to come out and visit the brethren. We look forward to seeing you. And now the host of Gospel Preaching Live, Richard Dodson.
Welcome back to Gospel Preaching Live. I'm glad you're able to join us this evening. You know, if you have any questions about anything that I say or teach, you can always call or text me at the number that's scrolling at the bottom of your screen, 816-686-9517. That's my personal phone number. You can also email me at gospelpreachinglive@gmail.com. It can be a question or it may be a request for a sermon, whatever you might have, spiritually speaking. I'm there to try to answer that. I am the minister of the Kearney Church of Christ, and part of my work, part of the work of the church at Kearney, Missouri, is to take the gospel to the world. And we try to preach it in our community to the best that we can do. And if it so be that the message goes even farther out in the community, we're glad for that to happen. So wherever you may be watching, if you have any questions at all, or perhaps you're not even watching live, this may be a rebroadcast, go ahead and submit your question and I'll see what I can do for you. Gospel Preaching Live is broadcast live on Facebook and YouTube every Thursday at 7 o'clock and also Sunday at 6 p.m. You can reach those Facebook page and the YouTube channel by going to the Kearney Church webpage, www.kearneychurch.com, Kearney, Missouri. Just remember the name Kearney, kearneychurch.com. And all you have to do is press on the Facebook link or the YouTube link, and it will take you right to it. And I believe I've been airing these on the Berean Spirits page as well, which is another show. So that'd be another way for you to be able to have access to the shows. But feel free if you want to watch some sermons. If you missed any, go back and watch them. That's what they're there for. But make sure you share these if you would. If you know people who need to hear this message, send it to them. Send them the link. Say, listen, maybe you need to hear this. We want this to try to help people. That's the whole purpose of Gospel Preaching Live, is to help people. And so if you can help me do that by spreading the message of these sermons, then I would greatly appreciate that. Gospel Preaching Live is also rebroadcast every Sunday morning on KPGZ 102.7 FM in Kearney, Missouri. So if you live in the Kearney area, you can tune in to 102.7 at 7 o'clock Sunday morning, and you can hear a lesson on the radio. After the lesson, you'll have time to get ready and come to church, because we meet at 9:30 for Bible study, 10:30 for worship, and you'd get to hear 2 sermons that morning. Wouldn't that be great? So besides that, I'd love to meet you and get to know you a little better. So if you would, if you're listening to the Kearney area, come on down to the church building and 406 North Clark. Again, we'd love to see you. If you're not in the Kearney area, but you still want to listen to these sermons on Sunday morning, you can download an app on your phone to where you can listen to various radio stations that stream their signal, and KPGZ does stream. So you can tune in to that radio station on your phone and listen at 7 o'clock in the morning for a lesson. Or you can just, get online, go to the internet, go to their website, and you should be able to stream it there. But needless to say, I'm glad that you were able to join us this evening, and I hope the message will be beneficial to you. Tonight's lesson is a good thing for us to listen to at this time of night. It's 7 o'clock. Everyone's getting settled. You might have already had your dinner. I haven't had my dinner yet. I eat after I preach on Thursday nights. But if you've already had your dinner and you're getting settled, you're starting to think about just relaxing a little bit before you go to sleep, and then you'll start your day tomorrow. But before you do that, spend a little time with me today, because I want to ask you a question. I want you to look back on your day and ask yourself, were you great today? Or were you just blah? But be honest with yourself. Try to grade yourself the best that you can do. In Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 10, Solomon said, whatever your hand finds to do it with your might. For there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going. And that Sheol is the grave. You're going to the place of the dead. And so where you're going, this is your opportunity to do something. And Solomon says, this is the time to take advantage of the time that you have. The time that you have is now. And so if you do it, whatever you're choosing to do, whether you're cooking, whether you're working, whatever it is, if you're doing it with all your might, that's what the Lord wants us to do. He wants us to be great. Now, in respects to that, what I want to do today is talk about being great as a Christian, because each and every day as a Christian is important. Many times, and I've done this too, many times we like to reward ourselves. We like to think, well, I have been disciplined for 7 days, 14 days, whatever it may be. And, I can slide a day. Not in Christianity, you can't. Being a Christian means you're going to endeavor to be on your game every day. You want to be great every single time out, because the devil's waiting for that day when you're going to take a day off, and that's when he's going to visit you. Sometimes when I'm trying to lose weight, and I do have a weight problem, and it's something I do struggle with, but sometimes when I'm trying to lose weight, I'll go for 2 or 3 weeks and I'll say, wow, I've been really good. We're going out to eat and they got this really nice chocolate cake. I need to reward myself. I've been good for so long. Yeah, you give in a little, and then next thing you know, you're giving in a lot. You start rewarding yourself a little too much. And that's the same way it is with Christianity. When you discipline your body as a Christian has to do, there's always going to be that tendency after a while when the temptation gets strong to say, I've been good for so long. I can be less than great today. That's a recipe for disaster. So we're going to look at that. I want us to sit back and ask ourselves, were we great today? Because the scriptures, they give us a lot of verses about that we should be in different respects to our lives. One that has to do with our work. In Colossians chapter 3 and verse 23 through 24, Paul told those in Colossae, he says, whatever you do, work heartily, as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. Now you think about that. You go to work, and you have a tendency to compare what you're doing with the other workers. And you may be far excelling them. You may be doing just a fantastic job, way better than they are. But then you get that time, you get a little period, and you think, I can slide a little bit because I'm so much better than everybody else. My boss isn't going to care. He's not going to get on to me very much because he knows I'm the best he has. Well, that's not what the Lord wants. The Lord says, whatever you do, you work hardly, not for that man, but for the Lord. And that's what we should be working for. Whether you're driving a bus at the airport, or if you're president of the United States, or preaching a lesson, or being a minister of a church, you have to do everything you can as if you're doing it for the Lord. And if you put that into your mindset, your work's going to reflect that, because you're going to be working a whole lot harder, and you're going to be much more of a perfectionist. In 2 Corinthians, and when you're a perfectionist, you get better because you stress yourself to get better. It's never good enough. And so you're constantly working to make yourself better when you're trying to perfect your work. In 2 Corinthians chapter 13 and verse 5, Paul said, examine yourselves to see whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves. Or do you not realize this about yourselves, that Jesus Christ is in you, unless indeed you fail to meet that test. And of course, that's what we're going to do. We're going to ask ourselves tonight, we're going to examine ourselves to see if we are great, because that's what we need to be doing. We need to make sure we're doing the very best that we can do. So we separated this, as the scriptures separated our text, into 4 groups. And the first one we're going to talk about is works, because we need to be great in our works. We're going to look at Luke chapter 9 and verses 61 through 62, John chapter 4, verse 34 and 35, Ephesians chapter 5, verse 14 and 15, 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 58, and then Philippians chapter 2 and verse 12 through 13. I'd invite you to look these scriptures up, make note of them. You can look them up in your own Bible, or you can follow along with me on the screen. Either way, it's important that we look into God's word. Now, in Luke chapter 9, verse 61 through 62, this is a really good passage of scripture. It's really, the whole context is contained in verse 57 through 62. And it's a great sermon. It's I call it the I will follow but. There's 3 guys that come to Jesus saying, I will follow thee but. And each one of them has conditions that that has to be met before they agree to follow the Lord. Well, that's just not the way life is. And you don't follow the Lord. You don't put conditions on the Lord. The Lord puts conditions on you. And in each one of these examples he gives, there is conditions that he puts. He responds to that. You know, first of all, he says to the first man, he has no place to lay his head. And that tells us about the sacrifice that's going to be involved in following Jesus. And then the next man is told that he wants to go home and bury a family member. And of course, Jesus said, let the dead bury their dead, which sounds pretty blunt. But what he was trying to say is, my work is urgent. This has to get going. We can't afford to delay. And then the last standard is one we're going to talk about, is in verse 61 through 62. And what he's going to talk about is making sure that we meet we need to realize we meet a certain standard in order to be able to follow Jesus. He says, another said, Lord, I will follow thee, but let me first go bid them farewell, which are at home at my house. And Jesus said to him, no man having put his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God. So when he says fit, he's saying this man doesn't qualify. He doesn't meet the minimum standards. He thinks he can go home and tell everybody goodbye, but he can't. I need men who are committed to the work. There's no buts in following Jesus. There's no conditions that you place on him. You have to commit yourself to the work. And all too often, we see people who are there. We have to ask ourselves if they even want to be a Christian, because they seem to work very hard at getting out of work in the service of Christianity. Now, there's a lot asked for a follower of Christ. And Paul said in 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 2 that we have to be in season and out of season. Now, he was talking about an evangelist being that way, but it applies to everybody. You have to be ready to go. When the Lord has work to be done, you got to do it. It's time. It's time to go to work. Doesn't matter if you didn't sleep last night. Doesn't matter if you're feeling a little ill. None of all that matters. When it's time to go to work for the Lord, you got to be ready to go. And those are the kind of people that the Lord's looking for. Those are that's his minimum standard. People who are ready to get to work. And so we have to be great in our work and our commitment to the work. In John chapter 4 and verse 34 and 35, this is a passage that talks about the opportunity that's out there if we would commit to the work. Because his disciples came to Jesus and they were concerned because he didn't have anything to eat. But Jesus said, my meat is to do the will of him that sent me and to finish his work. He says, say not ye, there are yet 4 months, and then cometh the harvest. Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, for they are white already to harvest. Now think about that. His meat is not to do the will of him that sent him, but to finish his work. Most people go to work to fill their bellies. That's not why Jesus worked. That's why he said, I have meat that you don't know anything about. He said, my meat is to do the will of him that sent me. That's what he fed upon. And if it killed him, if he had to starve to death to finish the Lord's work, that's what he was going to do. He was that committed. And that's what we have to be doing as well. And for people who are that committed, which a Christian has to be, the opportunity abounds. There are people out there that need to hear the gospel that will respond to it, and they need someone to come and tell them about that. Now, it's important when we talked about the urgency a little bit ago. Notice what's said in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 14 through 15. Paul said, wherefore he saith, wake thou that sleepeth, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light. See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Yeah, it's urgent, because we don't know how much time we have. So we have to be busy. We have to redeem the time. And so it's important that we do that in our work. That's part of being great. If we're going to be great, we take advantage of the opportunity that's before us. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 58, Paul told the Corinthians, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. For as much as you know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Always abounding. That means you got to be busy, always busy. And then tell yourself how you can be busier. And I know that sounds like, wow, that's a lot to ask for. I told you Christianity is all about commitment. 99% commitment to Jesus is not enough. Jesus wants you 100% committed. And if you're willing to do that, he'll commit himself 100% to you, which means, as a brother I heard say this morning on Berean Spirits, Christianity is just awesome. And I thought that was the best statement. He's right. Christianity is truly awesome. And the reason it's awesome is because once you're committed to Jesus 100%, and you see all the blessings that come upon you because Jesus is committed to you, and it's just fantastic. So we have to be in our commitment to Jesus, abounding in his work. Philippians chapter 2, verse 12 through 13 talks about this, because we see when we're committed to Jesus and doing his work, when we're being great, we see the work of the Lord happening, and it's something that's just amazing to see. He says in Philippians 2, verse 12 through 13, wherefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God that worketh in you both to will and to do his good pleasure. Yes, the Lord has a pleasure, a good pleasure, and he's going to use you. And when he uses you, make sure you keep in mind what is said in Mark 10, verse 27. All things are possible with God. And so if you really want to see some amazing things, commit yourself 100% to Jesus, because he's going to use you. You'll be a tool in his toolbox. And what a blessing it is to ride along with the master and see all the things that he accomplishes that you might have thought were impossible before you were a Christian. But now that you are a Christian and you're 100% committed to the work, you get the blessings of seeing the Lord's work, and it is an amazing thing to see. Just as my brother said this morning, Christianity is awesome. He's right. It really is. In our text, we also talked about being great with our thoughts. Sometimes we can let our thoughts slide away and get into a part that they shouldn't be getting into. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And we're going to look at Matthew chapter 15 and verse 19, and then Luke chapter 6 and verse 45, Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2, and then Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8. But first, let's look at Matthew chapter 15 and verse 19. When Jesus said this, and it isn't a revealing verse, he says, out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, theft, false witnesses, and blasphemies. Now, when he says for out of the heart, he's not talking about your physical heart. He's talking about those things that you're thinking about. Because when you start thinking about evil thoughts, pretty soon you might manifest those physically. I mean, a murder that takes place is first thought about. It doesn't just happen. Adulteries are planned. I mean, people think about that before it even takes place. And so are thefts and false witnesses and blasphemies. All these things are usually thought of. Before you say anything, you think about what you're going to say and it comes out. Maybe a split second, but you're thinking. And so you need to control your thought. You need to be great at controlling your thought. Jesus said in Luke chapter 6 and verse 45, a good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth that which is good. And an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart brings forth that which is evil. For out of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaketh. As Proverbs 4 and verse 23 states, we need to keep our heart with all diligence. We need to make sure we're being very careful with the very things that we think about. And so that means we need to be careful with what we surround ourselves with. We need to be careful about the TV shows we watch, the music we watch, the movies we watch. We need to be careful about the companions that we have, because we don't want to be influenced to be anything less than great. We want to surround ourselves with people who are going to help us attain our goal. Now, that doesn't mean that we're removed from the world. No, sir. The Lord taught we needed to go out to the world and to teach sinners. But we cannot let people who are committed to sin, lost in sin, influence us to be anything but less than great in controlling our thoughts. Romans 12, 1 and 2 speaks of this when Paul said, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. He said, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable and the perfect will of God. Yeah, you're going to have to rein in that mind of yours. You can't be involved in lusting, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. You're going to have to learn to control that. And that's going to take a lot of self-discipline. But when you do that, see, you're renewing your mind. You're being obedient to what Paul commands in Romans chapter 12 and verse 1 and 2. Now, how do we go about doing that? Well, we alluded a little bit to that by being careful about the things we surround ourselves with. But in Philippians 4 and verse 8, Paul speaks directly to this. He said, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. And so that's what we need to do when we're trying to be great. We need to be thinking about these very things that Paul told the Philippians to think about. If we do that, we're going to be able to rein in our thoughts and control them so much better. But that's not enough. In the passage, when we're talking about trying to be great, we found out that we need to learn. We need to apply ourselves to get knowledge. Now we're going to look at Exodus chapter 7 and verse 5, and then Ezekiel chapter 11 and verse 10 through 12, and then Matthew chapter 13 and verses 10 through 11. In Exodus chapter 7 and verse 5, this is simply what the Lord was telling Moses about going to Egypt and trying to bring back the Israelites out of bondage. Well, it wasn't trying, it was going to happen. But he wanted Moses, the Lord was going to teach the Egyptians something through Moses. He said, the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. And that's what the Lord wanted them to know. I am the Lord. Of course, they worshiped many false idols, but he was going to plague Egypt with different plagues. And of course, He was going to end up bringing his children out of Egypt, and they would know the hard way that God is God. Now we see the same thing said in Ezekiel chapter 11, verse 10 through 12, when Ezekiel was told the Lord to prophesy against Israel. He said, "You shall fall by the sword, and I will judge you in the border of Israel, and you shall know that I am the Lord." And then he goes on later. He says, "You shall know that I am the Lord, for you have not walked in my statutes, neither executed my judgments, and have done after the manners of the heathen that are round about you." You know, they did learn, but they didn't learn the way that I would want to learn. And we have to understand that's true for us even today. We may choose not to know the Lord and to have regard for his commands as being God, but there will come a time when we will know. On judgment day, for instance, in Romans 14:11 says, every knee shall bow. Every knee is going to bow down before God and confess him. And so that's going to happen. Now, do you want to know that now, or do you want to know it when it's too late? Now, I would rather know about God's power while I can still receive grace and mercy. But in Matthew chapter 13 and verse 10 through 11, we have a passage that talks about that very thing, how we can get to know those very the things that are going to help us learn about God. It says the disciples came and said to Jesus, "Why speakest thou unto them in parables?" Because that was a common way in which Jesus spoke. A parable could be very confusing to someone who was not seeking an answer to it. Now, the disciples, they would always come to Jesus wanting to know the answer to the parable, and Jesus would give it to them because they were seeking the answer. But those who were evil, they didn't care to know. But Jesus answered them and said unto them, "Because it's given to you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given." It's given to you. Now, you know, the Apostle Paul tells us in First Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 10 that knowledge has been revealed unto him and the apostles by his Spirit, because the Spirit searches all things, even the deep things of God. And of course, we know those apostles wrote down that holy truth, and so we can go to the Bible and we can study it so that we can know God. That's why 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 15 says, "Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needs not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth." We need to be able to rightly divide it. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is to set your mind to knowing God's word, to know the truth, getting knowledge. Now, knowledge is not enough. You can know something, but you have to be able to apply it. We'll talk a little bit about that. That leads us to our last point tonight, and that's wisdom. We're going to look at Proverbs chapter 29 and verse 15, Hebrews chapter 12, verse 5 through 7, and then 2 Timothy 4, verses 1 and 2, and then the lesson will be yours. And before we get into that, I do want to make this point. This is something my daughter taught me. I asked her one time, what is the difference between knowledge and wisdom? And this was her answer. Knowledge is knowing a tomato is a fruit, but wisdom is knowing not to put it in fruit salad. And I thought that's a really good answer. It's not enough just to know a lot of Bible verses. I know a lot of people who know a lot of Bible verses, but they don't know how to rightly divide it. They don't know how to give the sense as the Bible speaks of. And so we have to be able to do that. Now, in Proverbs chapter 29, verse 15, we see what happens when we apply the scriptures to our lives. And we'll talk more about that after going through this. There is a comparison made about a parent with their child when it says the rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings his mother to shame. Yes, when I was a child, I understood my parents' rules, but when I violated those rules, I learned how to apply them because they first applied a peach tree switch to my rear end. And that taught me wisdom. So I understood at that point on how to apply their rules properly. In Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 5 through 7, we read the same thing when he said, have you forgotten the exhortation which speaks unto you as unto children? My son, despise not the chastening of the Lord, nor faint when thou art rebuked of him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is he among the father whom the father chastens not? And that's right. The reason that I chastened my children, reason my parents chastened me, was because of the love that we had for them. And so it was important then that there would be a way of rebuking the things that we're doing is wrong so that we can learn wisdom. Now, in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1 through 2, we find out how the Lord does that. When Timothy was told by Paul to preach the word, be instant in season, out of season. Why? Because it reproves, it rebukes, and it exhorts with all long suffering and doctrine. Yes, when you go to the Bible and the Lord rebukes you from the teachings of the Bible, you're being chastised. And sometimes it doesn't feel too good. People have come up to me before and said, Richard, you stepped on my toes when you were preaching that lesson today. You know what? Sometimes my lessons step on my own toes. And the reason is because it's not my lesson. It's God's lesson. If you've listened to this sermon tonight, you've heard God's lesson. This has nothing to do with me. I'm just merely the messenger. That's why I've been giving you these scriptures. Because if you feel like you've been rebuked, it's not me that's doing it. It's the scriptures that's doing it. And maybe you should be encouraged by the fact that if the Lord's rebuking you, he loves you and he wants you to do what's right. Now let's go back to our text. Whatever your hands find to do in Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 10, he says, do it with all your might, for there is no work, which we talked about, or thought, which we talked about, or knowledge, or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going. And those are the 4 points we talked about tonight. Now, I want you to ask yourself, were you great today? After you've listened to the lesson, were you great? And if not, ask the Lord for forgiveness. And tomorrow morning, when you wake up, make that determination. Today's going to be a great day because I'm going to be great today. We are what we think we're going to be. And so if you think you're going to be great tomorrow, there's a good chance you will be. Just make that commitment and ask the Lord to help you, and I'm sure he'd be more than glad to do so. That's your lesson for this evening. I hope it's been beneficial for you. Remember, if you're ever in the area, come to 406 North Clark. That's where the Kearney Church of Christ meets. 9:30 for Bible study, 10:30 for worship. For if you need a map, you can go to the kearneychurch.com, the website, and you can find all the information you need. If that's not enough information, again, you can call or text that number that's on the bottom of the screen or shoot me an email and I'll be glad to respond. Don't forget to listen at 102.7 FM KPGZ every Sunday morning at 7 o'clock if you live in the Kearney area. You can hear gospel preaching live over the radio. And then Sowers with Swords is an internet show that I do with my brother-in-law, Chris Peltz, the minister of the Church of Christ in Springfield, Missouri. We discuss biblical issues and try to do that in connection with the Bible. That airs every Tuesday at 10 o'clock. You can log into the Kearney Church's Facebook page and watch it live, or you can see a rebroadcast. And the Berean Spirits is another show that you might be interested in. It aired this morning at 10 o'clock, or every Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. You can go to the Berean Spirits YouTube channel, or you can go to the Kearney Facebook page and watch it every Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. It airs, and I hope you would join us if you might. You might. It's pretty fun. We have a really good Bible study. We try to copy the attitude of the Bereans. And all right, that's all I got for you this evening. Our next lesson will be this Sunday at 6 p.m., and I hope you'll join us at that time. Until then, remember, this is the day the Lord has made. Let's rejoice in it and be glad.
This has been Gospel Preaching Live. Join us each week as truth is taught, faith is examined, and beliefs are challenged. Be sure and hit the like button so you can be notified of future episodes. And to watch past episodes, go to our website, kearneychurch.com. This has been a work of the Kearney Church of Christ.